The agenda this week assessed the trilateral talks over the North American Free Trade Accord, added up the trouble with math scores in the province, and met the new leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. The agenda's Week in Review begins with our first interview of the season, a conversation with Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne. This is probably your least favorite graphic of all of the graphics people show about you. You know, the Angus Reid Institute, they love to have some fun with this public opinion polling. And they do every few months, they say, how are the premiers in this country doing? And there you are.
There I am.
Number 10 out of 10, with about as many people believing that Elvis is alive who like the job that Kathleen Wynne is doing. I'm not meaning to be a smart aleck here, but that's a low number, Premier, and you'll acknowledge that. And I want to just start with, what's it like waking up every single day knowing you're the least popular Premier in the whole country?
Well, you know, that's not my first thought, Steve. My first thought is, what's on our agenda today? What are the things that that we need to do to make sure we make good decisions? I mean, and that is honestly what I think about. I get up in the morning, I read the newspaper, I see, you know, how the things that we're doing are being interpreted, and I get ready to go out and have my run and clear my mind, and then come in and do my job.
You think it's all fake news?
No, I don't think it's fake news. No, I am perfectly willing to accept the numbers that we see. What we also see, you know, the other chart is that people are they're impressed with some of the things that we're doing, if not all of them. You know, I mean, people are happy that we're raising the minimum wage. People are happy that we've moved on hydro. I don't mean everybody's happy. I just mean that there are a lot of people who look at what we're doing and say, you know what, those are good things, whether they like me or not, you know? And I've said to you before, it's not a popularity contest, you know? It's not about my personal popularity. It's not why I got into politics.
I hear you, but good policy, they always say good policy is good politics. And if you think you're bringing in good policy, then presumably the numbers follow. The numbers are not following, and I'm wondering if you have any theories as to why that is.
You mean my personal numbers aren't following? You know what? That is up to you and all the pundits that you talk to.
I'm not a pundit. I just ask questions.
Yeah, well, I have to look to the people who are interpreting my behavior. I'm doing my very best every single day to make decisions that are in the best interest of this province and to make it a place that's fair and provides opportunity for everyone. That's what free tuition is about for kids going to college and university. That's what more childcare spaces is about. That's what free prescription medication is about. The province is doing well, and we want to make sure that everybody shares in that.
Just for the record, that's free prescription medication
for kids. For kids,
those
sorry.
25 and under.
It's for 25 and under, starting in January. Yeah, 0 till their 25th birthday.
Let's finish up on this. This is going to sound like an odd question, but I just finished, this is how interesting my summer was. I just finished a 1,200-page book on Barack Obama, but about 1,000 pages of which is birth to becoming president. So it's not about his presidency, it's actually about his life. And the book concluded that he was obviously an historically important president because he actually cared a lot about policy, he cared about improving people's lives, he was there to do the public's business and do good. But it also concluded he actually didn't like politics very much, and he really didn't like politicians very much at all. And when I read that, I thought, I got to ask Kathleen Wynne that question. Do you like politics?
I love being able to work to solve problems. I love the opportunity to really get into the issues that affect people's lives every day. I remember when I first started canvassing in 1994, I ran for school trustee against Anne Vanstone and Linda Sparling. You might remember, I've been on the board for a very long time in Toronto. And I remember beginning the canvassing exercise and feeling like this is just the best thing in the world, to be able to go up to people and have a real conversation about an important issue without having to explain why. You know, there's no small talk here. We can just talk about what's going on in your child's life because I want to make it better. And that's still what I love about politics. No matter where I go, I go into Tim Hortons all over the province. I can walk up to a table, and whether the people like me or not, they are open to having a conversation about what's bugging them or what they're happy about, because it's like I'm a vector for that discussion. I love that, Steve.
Do you like politicians?
Some.
Only the red kind,
You know what?
or do you like some blue or
no,
orange
I like
as
some
well?
blue and orange politicians. I mean, I like people. I like people. And I like people in all their diversity, you know. I am fascinated by the points of view that I come across in politics. And I firmly believe, I mean, you talk about partisan differences, I believe that every person who sits in that legislature is there because they believe they have something to contribute. We all express it differently, and we have different life experience, but they wouldn't put themselves through the
It's a grind.
The challenge of putting your name on a sign and running for office. As my son said to me, you know, Mom, you could just apply for a job like everybody else. He said that years ago. But the reality is that there's something very special about winning people's trust and then working to live up to it. And we are flawed. We don't always do that. But that effort, I just love that.
Last question. Did you ever, and you sure got a lot of advice from a lot of different corners, including from a former finance minister of the province of Ontario on this program, to quit? Numerous people urged you to think hard about whether you really wanted to lead the party into the next election next June. Did you ever entertain that idea?
I thought responsibly and seriously about that because there were lots of people saying it to me. But in my heart, I never believed that I would leave. I believed that my work is not done and that I need to lead the party into the next election.
And you're prepared to gamble on leaving politics the way that no one wants to leave, which is, you know, to be invited by the people not to come back.
I'm always prepared to lose. I lost my first election, that one I was just talking to you about. I lost my first nomination race.
To Michael Bryant,
if I remember. Yeah. So I'm always prepared to lose. But I believe that it's important if I feel and I have a team that believes that I have something to contribute to the debate and that it's important for me to run, then it's worth taking the risk. Politics is extremely important to me. It is extremely important to me that we have good government in this province and in this country. And I would say, Steve, at this moment in the history of North America, it's even more important. And it's even more important that women leaders step up and say, this is right. This is the path that we should be on. I believe that people in Ontario, I said this in my leadership speech, you know, I don't believe that they're bigoted. I don't believe that they hold prejudice in their hearts. And so it's extremely important to me that I be a voice for that position in the next election. And that's why I'm doing it.
I think everybody knows you're not going to out-charisma the current occupant of the Prime Minister's office. So what is the sort of unique selling proposition that Andrew Scheer is offering Canadians?
Well, basically, you know, selfies and stylish socks won't pay the bills. We see a lot of policies that the Liberals are pursuing that are hurting families, whether it's cancelling popular tax credits like the public transit tax credit, whether it's eliminating income splitting, whether it's lowering the cap on tax-free savings accounts. So the Prime Minister has a lot of celebrity appeal, but more and more Canadians are seeing that his policies are hurting the very people he claims to help. Right now, he's engaged in a massive assault on small businesses that employ 75% of the workforce in the private sector. So these are real jobs at stake. These are our mom and pop stores and communities that keep communities alive, and they're all going to have to pay a higher tax burden, which means fewer jobs. So it's the policies that we're going to come forward with in the next 2 years. I believe we can convince Canadians to, you know, don't be fooled by the sizzle if there's no stake. And the Conservative Party, under my leadership, will have an ambitious set of positive policies that will speak to the aspirations of Canadians.
I appreciate your position on that, but of course, before people consider whether they want you for Prime Minister, I think you have to demonstrate, at least this is the conventional wisdom, that you've sort of got control of your own group. And I want to know how you're going to do that, given that you won your convention with less than 51% of the vote. It was 50.95. And given that, I mean, your friend Patrick Brown in Ontario can tell you what a tough job it is to unite economic conservatives, foreign policy conservatives, democratic conservatives, red Tories, social conservatives, libertarians. I mean, they're all there in that big blue tent. How the heck do you do that?
Well, you're absolutely right that it's a challenge for any leader, regardless of what the margin may have been or the other types of candidates that were running. I can tell you the sense in the caucus right after the leadership was a great sense of enthusiasm and unity. We all had our say in the race. Each of us, who backed other candidates or who supported my leadership or, stayed neutral. We all had a vote. Every member of our party had a vote. They had the opportunity to have a say in our system. Once that result comes in, you move on and you look forward. And there's a lot of common ground between all the different kinds of Conservatives you mentioned. I like to say that if we have a list, two sheets of paper, and on one we write down all the issues or the policies that divide Conservatives that we can't agree on, and on the other, write down all the ones we do agree on and that we can have that common ground. Which list should we tackle first? I know the answer to that question for me, and that's what I've offered my caucus, to say, look, there's a lot of issues that overlap the different kinds of Conservatives. Let's get to work on those ones. Let's put those in the store window for Canadians so that we can earn their trust back. And one thing that is for certain, no matter what kind of Conservative you are, when Justin Trudeau is Prime Minister, it's bad news. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for national defense. It's bad for foreign policy. So that's my message to members of my own team in caucus, and also to the Conservative Party membership, that we win when we're united, and there's so much that we can agree on.
Since you mentioned the current Prime Minister, I did want to follow up on one line in the speech that you gave, your victory speech at the convention in Toronto, and that was, you said to the current Prime Minister, I'm not going to let you do to this generation what your father did to my generation. And I must tell you, my ears pricked up when I heard that, because it's usually a given in politics that you don't go after a guy's family. Now, I realize that, his dad is not just any ordinary dad. He was the former Prime Minister. But tell me why you put it just that way.
Well, I have 5 wonderful kids. They're ranging in age from 12 to 1.5, and I don't want them to be saddled with the billions of dollars in debt that the Prime Minister is adding to the national debt. And when I think back to when I started my working career, a good percentage of my tax dollar was going to pay just the interest on the massive debts that Pierre Trudeau left us. And Pierre Trudeau, massively increased the size of the federal government, massively increased government spending, spent a lot of tax dollars on projects and programs that now aren't even there for my generation. The spending was done in the 70s and 80s, and that the money ran out, and a lot of the programs got cut back in the 90s because the debt was so big. And that's not fair. It's not fair to the next generation of Canadians to leave them with the bill for spending today. And I wanted to make that point because, first of all, my generation and those a little bit older and younger are still working to pay off the debt from the federal government in the early 80s, those massive deficits. And I don't want that to happen to my kids. There's a lot of positive signs about an economic recovery. I think the Liberals are doing everything they can to impede that. But it's the spending, it's the debt, it's the fact that as interest rates rise, when my kids enter the workforce, more and more of their hard-earned money is going to pay the interest on the spending that Justin Trudeau's racked up, and it's not even benefiting Canadians today. It's money being spent around the world on pet projects, ideological things.
I appreciate all that. Forgive me for jumping in. I appreciate all that, but I do recall Justin Trudeau in the campaign that elected the Liberals saying, Conservatives are not our enemies, they're our neighbors. I'm wondering why you are not concerned that you're not looking like a guy who's going after his dead father a little too harshly.
Well, I don't take it that way at all. I'm talking about the policies. I'm talking about the same types of tax and spend policies. It's in the Liberals' DNA. We see it time and time again in different iterations of Liberal parties where they have an addiction to raising taxes. They aren't worried about the economy that they're leaving future generations. So I think when we're talking about policies, when we're looking at what hasn't worked in the past, we know what the consequences of that are. We see this Prime Minister pursuing the exact same path. I think it's fair to make the comparison.
Okay, let me ask you about, I'm not going to pretend that this is your favorite subject, but you have discussed it in the past, and so I want to just explore it a little bit. Rebel Media, Ezra Levant, you've said you're not going to give them interviews anymore. How come?
Yeah, well, as I said several times on this issue, I watched what was happening in Charlottesville. I saw the outrageous displays of racism and hatred that have no place in a civilized society. And I do think there's a fine line between reporting on facts and saying, okay, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, and in any way adding legitimacy or you know, an extra platform or any kind of validation or agreement with some of those views being expressed. So that's why I took the decision on a go-forward basis that unless something changed, unless the editorial policy changed, I just wouldn't be lending my voice or my platform in that regard.
But you did make yourself available for interviews to them in the past. Your campaign manager once worked with them. You jokingly, I think, agreed to go duck hunting with Faith Goldie, who has since been fired from that outfit. What changed?
Well, as you said, that was prior, and what changed for me was watching those events in the way that I thought, the fine line between reporting on what's going on, holding up a light to events that are happening, and in any way adding legitimacy to them.
Our math scores are getting worse, and I'm wondering how worried you are about this.
Well, I think we definitely have to take it seriously. We have to remember a couple of things. Context is always important here, so that when we talk about the scores getting worse, what gets measured in Ontario is the percent of students reaching the standard. So this is the percent of students getting a B. So we're not saying all the rest of the kids are failing. It's just that many, about half of the kids are getting B. Most of them are passing math, but they're definitely doing worse. So we do have to pay attention to that. And we have to think about what it means and why. And the worry is we react to things and we go, oh, this is a disaster. John Manley famously said a few years ago it was a national emergency, the drop in math scores. I don't think this is a national or a provincial emergency.
You would like to see the numbers going in the
absolutely.
right direction.
The numbers should be going up, but I think what we have to make sure that we do is look at why. We are actually teaching math in the same way. The curriculum's the same. A lot of things have stayed the same, but the scores are changing. One of the things the EQAO reported on is about, they survey all the students in Ontario when they do these tests, kids' attitudes towards math. That may be a thing that's worrying. So I think that we have to look at a lot of the other kind of skills, foundational competencies that you need in order to succeed at math, but we can't ignore this.
Okay, but was it last year or the year before? I can't remember now, where the Ontario government came out and said, you know, we're going to spend $60 million to kind of improve the way that we help our teachers teach math, and we're going to see the results of that in higher test scores and kids who don't hate math as much as they used to and all that stuff. And it seems like, well, first of all, tell us, what did that $60 million go towards?
Well, in some cases, it did go to more support for teachers. It also, part of that policy was, we'll teach math for longer. It's not necessarily doing the same thing for longer isn't necessarily the solution. And it may have been a little bit simplistic, the reaction. The scores are going down, we're going to be seen to be doing something. I think we still need to do more work understanding exactly why. We need to look at streaming in grade 9 because the kids who are in the applied stream are doing very badly in math. And we need to understand what the attitudinal stuff is, because it seems as if, rather than going back to, I always horribly use my child as an example, that she loves this. I have a child who's done advanced statistics but doesn't know her times table. So it's not necessarily true that the problem is only, what's called automaticity, that kids need more drilling in math. But there definitely is, it may be us, it may be society, it may be parents, it may be, she was an economist, maybe all the rest of us going around saying math is hard and boring. And maybe we need to go back to more an attitude about what's joyful, what's interesting, what's exciting in math than we are right now.
Well, let me ask an economist, is math hard and boring? You've never thought so.
Well, I actually started out life as a mathematician and became an economist later. So I don't have math phobia, but I think Annie's point about the context is I think really important, and part of that context is political leaders running around saying that science is junk and doesn't matter, and climate change doesn't make any sense, and don't believe anything that those guys that have PhDs in science are telling you. It's all bunk.
We don't have a lot of that in this country. I mean, no, I know we get CNN here,
we're exposed to an awful lot of media.
Yes.
I mean, frankly, sadly, I spend more time reading about Donald Trump these days than I do about any Canadian politician, and I really can't avoid it. But I think that education in part reflects what society feels like it values, and I think in addition to worrying about those mechanics, about the craft of teaching math. I think the context is really important, and to the extent that we fail to push back against those public attitudes that dismiss factually based, scientifically based reasoning and thinking, to the extent that we don't push back at those things, we encourage people to think that they don't matter.
And if I could just add one more thing, I think that the danger is also in a kind of simplistic reaction again, so that one of the things we need to be doing more is connecting math to everything else. So understanding, you know, creativity, all the broader kind of competencies, and that math is part of that. So that if we put all our eggs in, if we swing back to going, now let's just focus on math, we miss the interconnection in learning. So that I think that one of the things that we do know about kids and about learning is that it's better to have a kind of integrated approach to understand how math is interwoven into so many other things, and how those creative skills, the social emotional skills that allow you to keep on working when stuff's hard, that all that has to be seen all of a piece. And right now we tend to just react.
Scotty, get us started here and just give us your assessment of where you think things are in the negotiations right now.
Well, Steve, things have only just started, and I think it's been pretty easy up until now, believe it or not. I think it's about to get challenging. I wouldn't want to be a Trump trade negotiator, because the president, if you don't know what the president's going to do, that's only next on trade. It's only because he doesn't know what he's going to do next on trade. He's all over the map in terms of his rhetoric, and that makes it really challenging for his own trade negotiators, let alone our friends in Canada and Mexico. So I think it's about to get really difficult. I think the Ottawa round will show some real tensions and some real splits, especially, for example, if we hear from the Commerce Department siding perhaps with Boeing against Bombardier, seeing what happens with softwood lumber. There are any number of disputes that could emerge in the forefront right as we enter the third round of negotiations.
Okay. Dan, what's your view on the state of play right now?
Well, it's wonderful to be with you, Steve, and I would agree with what Scotty said. I think, you know, Labor Day is in the rearview mirror here in Columbus, Ohio, and that means two things. Number one, it's the start of football season, which is an organized religion here in our city, particularly with the Ohio State University Buckeyes, but also the Major League Baseball playoffs and World Series are right around the corner. And I think just like what we'll see later this fall in the World Series, the NAFTA is a 7-game series. You know, everybody knows game one. There's all types of pomp and circumstance. Beyonce sings the national anthem. There's fireworks. That's what we saw in Washington a couple of weeks ago. I think Mexico City's game two, where things really got down, where the negotiators, the players got to work and started to really move forward on this agenda. But I agree wholeheartedly with Scotty. Game 3, 4, and 5, starting in Ottawa in just a few weeks, is where the action is really going to happen. Keep in mind that there's a lot of discussion right now that the U.S. hasn't tabled a lot of the ideas and points that they want to raise. That all happens now. The U.S., under our procedural system, has to come back, talk to its international trade advisory groups, the private sector, which includes some of us and our clients as well, and then talk to the committees of jurisdiction. So I think over the next 2 to 3 weeks, you're really going to see some of the U.S. positions formalize, and those will be presented in Ottawa, and that's really where we'll start seeing the meat of the lineup as we move forward. Okay, just one, I guess, admonition on that answer, and that is, as a Red Sox fan, don't get too presumptuous about the Cleveland Indians being in the World Series just yet. Just a word to the wise, Dan. Brian, your take on where things are at.
Steve?
Never mind.
The Blue Jays.
No, they're definitely not in it, I can guarantee you that.
Yes, and
right.
It's ruining the whole atmosphere for trade between the two countries.
It truly is.
The fact is that it's going exactly the way you'd expect, with the foreign ministers, the trade ministers saying great things. Oh, we've never been more cooperative. We're getting along on everything. And of course, we know that A, that's not true, and B, they're trying to do the easy stuff first, the stuff they actually can agree on. Here's what we do to extend the agreement. These are the areas we should cover. And everybody says, yeah, you're right, we should cover digital trade, for instance. And so they can say, you know, we're agreeing on a lot of stuff. They don't and won't, and the hard stuff is really going to come soon.
What concerns you about the state of play right now, Linda?
Well, what concerns me is that, you know, we're always focused on this idea that what we want to do as Canadians is preserve the deal. And what concerns me is that we need changes in the deal. You know, that the deal, the NAFTA, has been a real game changer in terms of strengthening corporate power and leaving workers more vulnerable. And I see nothing in the discussion that's going on in the positions put forward and in the negotiations that's advancing the cause of workers getting empowered.
You do see the President of the United States, and we have heard the Prime Minister of Canada both say they are concerned about the state of the average worker in our two countries.
Absolutely.
Does that not give you any satisfaction?
It gives me satisfaction if we see results going in that direction. What we've seen in recent years with NAFTA is a kind of hollowing out of our manufacturing sector in Canada. Particularly the auto industry, which is so incredibly important to Canadian workers. We've seen 25% of the workforce basically disappear and go down to Mexico. So to the extent that they end up addressing those kinds of issues, I will be encouraged, but I haven't seen that so far.
Mark, where are you on this?
I think it's going pretty much as you'd expect it to be at this stage. Part of what we have is the sort of what I'll call a natural timeline that Trump has presented, that if you take it seriously as a meaningful timeline, that will get people all excited. But as someone who's been involved in trade negotiations in various capacities, at the second round of meetings, you wouldn't expect it to be any further than where it is now. I mean, I guess, and you also would expect to see some posturing. We saw some posturing from the American administration. From my judgment, we've seen some posturing from Canada.
Should we play a little clip of that,
Sure.
actually? Here, let's play this, and then we'll continue with your answer. Sheldon, I'm on the bottom of page 1. President Trump on the free trade deal in Arizona last month. Roll the clip.
Personally, I don't think we can make a deal because we have been so badly taken advantage of. They have made such great deals, both of the countries, but in particular Mexico, that I don't think we can make a deal. So I think we'll end up probably terminating NAFTA at some point.
What impact, Mark, in your judgment, do statements like that have?
Well, they get people. What I'm going to say, standing back from this, I've been involved in this sort of world for about 30 years, and one of the things that has really changed is that negotiations of trade agreements have become much more public. People want a measure of transparency. It started in response to the multilateral agreement on investment at the OECD and then the Seattle ministerial meeting of the WTO. And so now what you have with technology, with Twitter, and with all of these 24-hour news cycles, people can project. So Trump is doing it. We just saw a clip. I would argue that the Canadian government is pretty healthy in the communications business on the NAFTA file. For instance, the story this weekend on maybe that Canada would want to see an end to the so-called right-to-work laws in the American South, something that will never happen, something that everyone who knows anything about trade knows will not happen. And so the only reason you would put that out in a newspaper story, I'm not even convinced it was actually tabled as a serious proposal at the table, but that's what we're seeing a lot. So we are where we normally would be, but there's a lot more posturing for the public, which is going to get people all excited. But I think as long as as folks at the table continue to work through the easy cases, and that for those of us who follow this stuff is building on the agenda that's baked into the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Some of that's pretty easy. And then over the next series of months, they'll have to work through the more difficult parts of the agenda, like the anti-dumping, countervailing duty, dispute settlement review system.
Let me just ask Scotty a real basic question off the top, and it relates to that clip we just heard from President Trump. He said he may just pull the plug on NAFTA, and I guess we need to know legally, can he do that?
Well, he can do that, sort of. I mean, Congress would have something to say about that, and there are differing opinions about who gets to control commerce in the United States. But I think the more important question, and Mark started to touch on it, Steve, is domestic politics. I have to give, particularly the Canadian government, a lot of credit to date for being really disciplined and really focused on what the agreement is about, how integrated our economies are, what that means for jobs and prosperity. And President Trump is not making it easy. It is really hard to resist reacting to some of the outrageous things that he says. And to date, the Canadian government and to some extent the Mexican government have been remarkably restrained in light of what they're taking on. It'll be really interesting to see if, as things progress, if they can keep that. Because, you know, again, the president, is prone to do anything. Just yesterday, he cut a deal with the Democratic congressional leadership on the debt ceiling and surprised Republicans. They were flabbergasted. They had no idea. There was no heads-up call. So the President of the United States does this on a pretty regular basis, including to his own trade negotiators, and it'll be interesting to see if our partners in these negotiations can keep cool and just keep their heads down and negotiate, or if at some point the political imperative will be to engage at that level, setting aside your very good question, which is what legally can he do? And that'll be, if he tries to pull out, it's the beginning of 1 million lawsuits from now until the end of the time. And I know the lawyers on the phone like that, but anything that's full employment for lawyers might not be good public policy.
Well, Steve, can I just jump in on one part of that? I think that I would describe the Canadian position as a little bit bipolar. Now, because I think for someone who focuses on the substance of this, we don't see the Prime Minister engaging in a lot of tweets. But when you go to the first meeting and say, by the way, we want to have climate change reference, which of course Trump's going to say no to the Paris Agreement. When you say, oh, by the way, like I mentioned before, we want to have the right to work laws. We want to deal with that on the table. Yep. Oh, Indigenous rights chapter, how about that one? So we've thrown some red meat on the table. So I think the notion that Canada's sitting there, innocently playing along while Trump is throwing all the bromides, I don't think that's the case.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, September 8th, 2017. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety on our website. That's tvo.org. They're on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda. And thanks to our nightly Twitter live stream on our Periscope page. That's periscope.tv/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.